Hello guys and welcome to Quipoin. In the last video, we learned about the basic of CSS. We saw this syntax of CSS. We learned about the types of CSS and we also learned how to connect our CSS file to the HTML file. Now, in this video, we are going to look into one of the most major and important aspect of CSS, that is margin and padding. These two things are very important to understand how the content is divided and how to apply our CSS. So without any further delay, hit that like button, subscribe to Quipoin, and let's get started. So first of all, the question arises, what is margin and what is padding? Let's go to our VS Code and understand it more clearly rather than pure theoretically. So I have already written what we are going to discuss here. We are going to discuss margin and padding. And now I have written the basic HTML code. Now let's create a h1 tag and say this is a heading. Okay. And let's open our live editor. Now you may see this heading. It is showing h1 tag. Now let's understand what is margin and what is padding, or what is margin and what is padding in this heading. Now, by definition, the space between the border and the content is padding, and the space between the web application and whole of the element is margin. It is quite confusing if you say it like that, but if we look at closure, let's style our h1. So I'm going to use the internal CSS, hence I'm going to use the style tag, and what I'm going to do is I am going to select h1 as the selector, then the block, and then the properties. So first of all, do remember margin and padding are the properties. They are not the selector. Okay. So that means margin and padding will be used inside a selector. To understand padding and margin, let's give a border. First, let's create a border to around the h1 tag. So if I create a border, let's say, so if we create a border around the h1 tag, now you can see here that a border has a red color border appeared around the h1 tag. Now what is padding? What I told about the padding, I told that space between content and border is the padding. Okay. So if you look the space between content, this is heading, is my content, and border is this 5px red color is the border. So the space between the content and the border is padding. This white space is padding. And if I use a padding and I say the padding should be 10px, so you can see how the space between the content and border increased. Okay. If I write it 20px, so see if how the space between this border and content increased. So this is padding. Okay. The space between content and the border is padding. Now the question arises, if this is padding, then what is margin? Margin is basically, by definition, space between the web app and the elements is margin. Okay. Now, what does this mean? This means the whole screen that you are seeing on your right side is your web app or web application or web page, and this border is your element. Okay, so the space between this web app and the border, to be precise, is your margin. Now let's look at it. Okay, if I write margin and let's give a 20 px to the margin, so you can see how it shifted, how it adjusted, how the element adjusted itself, and the distance between the web app and the element increased. If I give it 50 px, so you see how it got more wider, the margin got more broader. So this is your margin. The space between the border and the element is the margin, and the space between the content and the border is your padding. I hope it was clear and it is quite simple to understand it. Let's go to our Quipoin website, and here you can see the properties. So the margin creates space between other element and the browser window. So that is what we discussed here. It created a space between the web app and the element, and you can go to the padding and you can read it from here. And you can go to the padding and you can read here, the padding property is used to specify the space between content of an element and its border. So that is padding for you. Now you have got somewhat a core idea of what margin and padding is. Now let's deep dive into these margin and padding. They are quite similar in usage but different in definition, of course. And always you have to remember that when you are adjusting your content, then you have to use padding, and when you are adjusting your element in your web page, then you have to use margin. And when you are adjusting two element, then you have to use padding. So this is quite confusing for most of the beginners developer. They get confused between padding and margin, and they really mess up their CSS due to that. But if you remember the basic that we discussed here, that the space between content and border is your padding. So when you have to adjust your content, then you have to use padding, and when you have to adjust your element, then you have to use the margin. So when your basics is clear, you will be easily adjusting your content and elements. If you have any doubt, you can go and read the tutorial here, and you can go and solve the exercises. We have uploaded number of exercises in the margin and padding. And still you have any question or any query regarding to CSS or padding or the exercises or MCQ solve, you can go to let's discuss section and you can post your question here. We will be answering all your questions, and we have uploaded interview questions for the same. If you want to solve the interview question for the CSS, you can use the hashtag CSS, and the interview questions for the CSS will come. So we have uploaded for the margin, padding, and you can go and read it. They are the latest interview question. I hope you understood the video. In the next video, we are going to discuss about the border and outline property of the CSS. So please stay tuned with us, subscribe to Quipoin to get regular updates. And thank you for watching this video, and thank you.